So let's continue our read and commentary of the Treatise on the Resurrection, and this will be the second video of 3 for this particular book from the Nag Hammadi library. In the first video, we did talk about the writer revealing to us the nature of the Christ that came to earth, being both of the spirit and of the flesh, or the body. In this case, Son of Man and the Son of God. The Son of God representing the source of life, which is parallel to the tree of life in the garden that you hear about in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And the Son of Man paralleling tree of knowledge of good and evil that man has taken from so that they may have the ability to see and understand the difference between the two. And then the writer went in further to reveal that it is through that process that we're able to receive salvation from this corrupt realm known as the Kenoma, and also have a Gnostic moment of realization of what's known as the Pleroma, and an understanding of the true Father versus the false God that rules over this earth. Now, if you don't understand everything that I'm talking about, I do encourage you to go back and listen to video 1 for this particular chapter. And there are at least 10 other videos that you can listen to when you have time to really meditate on the great writings presented to us through Nag Hammadi findings, the Gnostic text. So let's continue from where we left off on video 1 for the Treatise on the Resurrection. And here we're going to go into the idea of Christ defeating death. So here it says, "The Savior swallowed up death. Of this you are not reckoned as being ignorant, for he put aside the world which is perishing." Now let's think about that. I posed a question to you in video 1. How is it possible that death can be defeated? How's that metaphysically possible? Death is a ultimate for everyone, every beast, every animal, every human being that we know. Even Christ himself was put on the cross to experience a type of death of his body and soul. So how is it that Christ was able to achieve swallowing up death? This is what we're going to go into. It points out right away, "Of this you are not reckoned as being ignorant." It's basically telling you that you know in you is the answer. You have the light in you, and that light merely needs to be turned on, and you'll understand one of the secrets of Gnosticism, of how death can be defeated. How is it possible metaphysically? This writer is inviting you to recall that, but also will help guide you along that process. And here it is. "For he put aside the world which is perishing." Now think about it. If you have say a piece of machinery, and it was not functioning, and it was intrinsic to that piece of machine to only half function, what would you do? Would you consider spending the time and the money to perhaps repair that machine? That could perhaps be one way you would go about it, to eradicate the dysfunction within that machine. Another way to perhaps eradicate that problem is to simply abandon the machine altogether. And this is the way in which Christ took his path. He didn't see the necessity of taking the time to repair the corrupt realm, but instead he put it aside, for he knew that that world was perishing. So it goes on to say, "He transformed himself into an imperishable aeon and raised himself up." Now think about the power of this mindset that he has. He has it within him not only to know, but also to recognize that he has the power to be whoever he chooses to be. So he chose to transform himself into an imperishable aeon. So this suggests that at one point perhaps he was not an imperishable aeon. For here it says he transformed himself into one. So it's important for us to understand what is the meaning of the word aeon. I touched upon this briefly in the last video. An aeon is essentially a characteristic or attribute of God. You can think of it as a archetype, if you like. You could also think of it as a expression of God. What you have to understand is that the aeon, or an aeon, is one of the building blocks to the formula or alchemy of creation. So you have certain aeons, for example. You have the aeon of faith, you have the aeon of wisdom, you have the aeon of creativity, so forth and so on. All of these aeons are various different body parts of the God. And of course, the Godhead is the Father, or the Father-Mother, if you want to think of it that way. It's the one that's willing the aeons, much in the same way that we, as human beings, have our head and brain willing our body parts. But without the body parts, we of course couldn't pick up things and make things with our hand or craft things with our hands. This is what the aeons do for the Godhead, or the Father in heaven, or the Mother Father. When it talks about Christ transforming himself into one of the aeons, what the writer's telling you is that Christ took upon the attributes or the characteristics of being God-like, and in so doing became the body of God, and there also became as an aeon, becoming imperishable, because these attributes are eternal and they cannot be destroyed. Ideas, concepts cannot be destroyed. They are eternal. They are accessible from the past and in the present and into the eternal future. They do not change. They are permanently always as they are, was, and will be. It's their nature to be imperishable. So this is the transformation that's being talked about here. And so this is part of the answer. Let's continue. And raised himself up. And this is the other part. You have to understand your worth and your value. You have to understand that you are a daughter and son of God, and that it's your rightful position to rise up to the occasion. In fact, it's your destiny, as you could say. Having swallowed the visible by the invisible, and he gave us the way of our immortality. Think about that. He didn't give us the way of you're worthless and your piece of nothing and your sewage, and if it weren't for me, God would hate you and burn you to a crisp in hell. No. Christ came because he loved humanity. It was the hands and arms of God that came to embrace humanity that had been misled by the demiurge and the archons down a path of destruction, to come and save us from that destruction, to bring us an understanding of our original home and origin. And that's what this is about, thereby showing us the path to eternal life. Spiritual gurus of the past or the mercenaries went out of the way to find the Philosopher's Stone or King Arthur's golden chalice or cup. Well, it's not in a material form. It's already being presented to us here. It is a mindset. You have to reorient yourself. Your brain is hooked up into the universal God force. It will function according to what you program it, and will project your reality based upon what you're programming. And if you believe you're not worthy to rise up to the occasion of being immortal, then you always will remain mortal, and you will always continue to come back. In addition to that, you have to take on the characteristics. It's not enough to simply believe you're worthy of being immortal, but you must be godlike. And when you take on the behavior of being godlike, and you believe you're worthy, and you have the faith that, yes, there's a resurrection, then it's at that moment that you are on the path to immortality. As it continues, then, indeed, as the apostle said, quote, we suffered with him, and we arose with him, and we went to heaven with him, unquote. What this writer is telling you, quoting the apostles, is that you have to walk the path of Christ. All the things that Christ did, Christ suffered, but Christ suffered for the sake of humanity and for the sake of Christ's own salvation and humanity's salvation, and then arose and went to heaven. So too, this is your path. Now, if we are manifest in this world wearing him, we are that one's beams, and we are embraced by him until our setting, that is to say, our death in this life. We are drawn to heaven by him, like beams from the sun, not being restrained by anything. This is the spiritual resurrection which swallows up the psychic in the same way as the fleshly. Now, this is important to understand. What does it mean by psychic and fleshly? And are they different things? Yes, they are. The flesh is merely a manifestation of what the psychic self is having faith in or has belief in. The psychic self is the part of the individual that is the mind of the person. It's the part of the self that is this sickle that cuts between the wheat and the chaff and determines how pure it will be or how impure it will be. And by pure, I'm saying how godlike it will be versus how ungodlike it will be. And that is determined by how much attachment you have to the material realm and the material things of this world. And you'll know it by all the behaviors that promote well-being, healing, hope, worthiness, light, love, and compassion versus all the opposites to those that will promote death, because death is a product of this realm. The opposite of death is life, and promoting life is the beginning of changing the psychic self. The psychic self gets swallowed up through the spiritual resurrection when you reorient yourself psychically. The psychic is the soul self, and then you have the flesh self, which is the body. But the psychic is the reservoir of the waters of life. So you can either open up the psychic self and let the waters of life flow, or you can close it altogether and the waters of life don't come through, and then you, of course, die a very slow and desiccating death, such as the case of most humans on this planet. All right, let's continue. But if there is one who does not believe, he does not have the capacity to be persuaded. So it is important to believe that it's possible, to believe in your worthiness, to believe that there is the resurrection after death. If you cannot believe those things, then it's much like saying to your computer program, I don't have the fingers to type in that particular program. Well, that computer is not going to do anything. It's going to sit there. For it is the domain of faith, my son, and not that which belongs to persuasion. The dead shall arise. So you cannot go by trying to logically prove this, because the demiurge purposely keeps everyone in the dark and is doing everything in their power to make sure that any evidence of the afterlife is kept from you. The very nature of your being born into this dark realm is much in the same way of being thrown into a dark room with no light. You can see how difficult it would be for you to see anything. And if you're looking for evidence of the door by looking around in the dark, you're not going to find it. What you have to do is you have to first believe there is a way out, and then you have to grope through the dark. You have to kind of go along and feel your way through and trust your instincts. That's the only way. It's through faith. This isn't something that you try to prove scientifically. And no matter how far the scientists go to the outer realms of the universe to prove there is or is not a God, they're never going to be able to do so, because it's a silent thing. As I said in previous videos, God is in the spaces between everything. It's in that silent space. And again, the reason why God is in those silent spaces is because God is perfect and eternal. When you have something that's limited and finite, such as this realm, you cannot fit the infinite into the finite. It's not going to happen. There's not enough room. So therefore, it cannot make itself evident through the senses or the material realm. It's only made evident by observing life itself. And everything around you is constantly reminding you and telling you, yes, there is life after death. Look at the trees, look at the flowers. The tree goes through a season, sheds its leaves, and then in the spring, the leaves come out, blossom forth again. That isn't a coincidence. That is life telling you, yes, there is a cycle, and yes, we go through a death process and we shed our skin. That is nature. That is the light within all things, permeating, constantly trying to, not even trying, but it is what's sustaining life. The light that's emanating from God, the God force, and it is eternal. The most important thing to gather from this is that it's the higher mind that is driving it. It's the quiet mind. It's the mind that does not calculate or makes logical, because the part of reason is on the level of the psychic. It's not on the level of the spiritual. Let's continue. There is one who believes among the philosophers who are in this world. At least he will arise. And so it says, this one who believes among the philosophers who are in this world. At least he will arise. And let not the philosopher who is in this world have cause to believe that he is one who returns himself by himself, and that because of our faith. So again, this is just talking about you can be philosophical, you can be scientific, but you're not going to be able to reason this through means of observation in terms of putting things under a microscope because it's much, much larger. It's on the macro level. You have to look at the encompassment of everything that is. So all of the cosmos and the way that it works and the way that it functions is a metaphor onto itself, onto the spiritual realm. It's telling you all the answers if you just pay attention and you look at it, you watch it. But you can't analyze it and put it under a microscope because you're only going to get a sliver of that experience. So that's what it's talking about. And when even like the philosophers, they're trying to create a dogma or they're trying to create some type of school of thought, but they're only going to get a piece or sliver of truth, and they're going to miss the full picture. This is what is being suggested here. It has to be by faith, and faith is the substance of things unseen. So it's that silent place and the evidence of that which will be. So it's everything that's becoming all the time is the life force, and the substance of things unseen is that silent space that we talked about earlier that God is in, because in that silent space is devoid of any corrupt material, and so God can be in that realm. For God can only be in the perfect realm. It continues, for we have known the Son of Man, and we have believed that he rose from among the dead. This is he of whom we say, quote, he became the destruction of death, as he is a great one in whom they believe, unquote. Great are those who believe. So the means by which Christ was able to swallow up death is to no longer be attached to death. The way in which you no longer attach to death is to no longer be attached to this life, this realm, the kanoma. And you cannot detach yourself from this kanoma if you do not have faith that there's something more and beyond this, the kanoma, known as the pleroma, because you will grasp instead desperately and urgently want to attach yourself onto this realm, unless you're of course suicidal, but then it won't matter. So let's continue. The thought of those who are saved shall not perish. The mind of those who have known him shall not perish. And known, again, is in the similar way that we talked about. It's not just knowing as in a story that's being told, but knowing on a very intimate level. In the Old Testament, when Adam and Eve had intercourse, it says, and then Adam came to know Eve. That's the level of knowing we're talking about here. That's the type of gnosis. You have to have a dialogue with the universe, you see, and then you bring forth a new creation. And the way to have that dialogue is, this is why prayer is encouraged. It's a type of meditating with the light, the God force, and it helps you to grow your faith in the beyond the kanoma. And meditation is allowing yourself to go into a space of emptiness, therefore allowing a space for God. And it also allows you to quietly listen to the song of the universe and all the truths and the life that's coursing through the universe, the light that is coursing through the universe. And it will empower you. So this is why it's encouraged to meditate. This is why it's encouraged to have a relationship with God so that God can come to you. Because when you are in God's presence, and God's within you, and God's all around you, but when you make an effort to open up a space, then God can not only be around you, but God can be before you and present with you and intercede with you and have supper with you, so to speak, and then share with you wisdoms in a quiet way, because again, God is silent. Therefore, we are elected to salvation and redemption, since we are predestined from the beginning not to fall into the foolishness of those who are without knowledge, but we shall enter into the wisdom of those who have known the truth. And the truth is, again, we are living in the kanoma, much like the movie of Matrix. We're living in a matrix. It's an illusion. It's an illusory world. There's nothing that can be gained from this world except to come here to find yourself, to go back to the real world. And to find yourself is to have all of the wisdom that you've picked up in the kanoma, with the understanding the sole purpose of doing so is to return to the real world of the pleroma. Indeed, the truth which is kept cannot be abandoned, nor has it been. Quote, strong is the system of the pleroma, small is that which broke loose and became the world. So this is important to note here, because it's telling you that we came here from the pleroma. We broke loose from the pleroma. But that incident is small, and it has no sway over the power of the place of God. So you need not worry. Be at peace. Have great confidence that the light of God is working within you and everyone. And some of us are perhaps being worked on more than others because of what we allow and what we have faith in. But understand that this is not a problem for God. It's small. But the all, which is God, is what is encompassed. It has not come into being. It was existing, unquote. So in other words, this is like small potatoes. I've seen this, I've done that, so to speak. For God, the mother, or father, mother, father, this is insignificant. This is not even a mosquito. So you need not worry. Be at peace. So, it goes on, never doubt concerning the resurrection, my son Reginos. For if you were not existing in flesh, you received flesh when you entered this world. And that's important to note because most of us have been taught that we were created as flesh and that there really is no spirit per se. It has to be Christ that cleanses our blood, and that maybe if we believe in that story and we kind of knock each other over the head, trying to keep each other in line to the law, then we might be able to squeeze into heaven and take on a new body. But here it's saying, no, actually, you have always been an eternal spirit, first and foremost, and you took on the flesh when you entered this world. And when you die, you'll leave it behind. And you'll come back if you want to and be reincarnated. But if you're ready to go back to the realm of the pleroma, then you will no longer need the flesh. But of course, that is a process, and we'll talk about that as we continue in the series. Hopefully, it will become more and more evident. How do you detach from this realm? And it isn't something you can lie about or make up, or it is a consequence of who you are, not of what you wish and hope for, but it is a consequence. In other words, as Christ says, you reap what you sow. If you are in a state where you still have attachments to this realm, then you still have unfinished business, and you will come back. You will be reincarnated, and you'll continue to be reincarnated until such time you are at a state of complete emptiness and at peace. Now, that does not mean you're at a state of being suicidal and you hate this world, because then you have no light in you. You are devoid of any hope, which is the very opposite of the pleroma. And you must be in vibration and resonance with the pleroma to be received into it, for no corruption can be brought into the pleroma. So suicide is not the answer. In fact, it will take you down, almost to the opposite direction of the pleroma, and you will come back in a very concrete form when you return back on the reincarnation wheel. And we'll talk about all of that. We're going to be introducing concepts of the will of life, and there is a will of life that Ezekiel talked about, and we'll talk about that as we go into the Bible. And for some of you already, you probably are thinking, I kind of know what you're talking about. Yes, you're right. It's astrology. And we'll talk about that. For now, let's just say that in order to be received into the pleroma, you have to ascend to the God level. Ascending to the God level is not trying to practice fasting from any kind of material adventures or lust or urges or fixations. Ascending to the Godship or the place of God is done in many different ways for different people, but it's essentially going to a place of wisdom whereby you're at peace and you've conquered the fear of death. You no longer have anything in this world. It's not a state of apathy, but it is a state of complete and utter gratefulness and peace. It's not that you cannot enjoy the things of this world. As it says, be in this world, but not of it. That's the key. But you take pleasure in the fullness of the holy way, the holy path. And it's kind of like I'll give you a little hint on that, and it is like this. And we continue on our journey together. This hopefully will become more and more clear as to what the path is that Christ laid out for us. But I'll give you a good example. One example, and this is why Christ always liked to give parallels, because it's the wisdom and the practice of life that we all understand in some way or another, would be the example of either having hamburgers and McDonald's and Coke and potato chips and cookies. And there's nothing intrinsically evil about that, at least not in the evil of what Orthodox Christians deem evil. But in the evil of it promoting death, that the way Gnostics understand evil, then yes, it's going the opposite of being godlike. Not necessarily because enjoying things is bad, and that's another difference between Orthodox Christians and Gnostic Christians. We do not view pleasure as something that's evil or bad, but instead, how we partake in pleasure, it will determine whether or not it's godlike or the opposite of godlike, and what will be the outcome of that, because everything in the universe will tell you whether or not it's promoting life or death. So if I'm always eating McDonald's burgers, for example, constantly eating McDonald's burgers or junk food, then I'm setting myself up for going down a path of death. On the other hand, if I am taking on a more healthy diet, then I will start to transform my body and become more healthy, and I will increase the odds that I will prolong my mortal self. And certainly, I will be moving toward immortality versus moving toward mortality, you see. And that's just a small little analogy I can give you, but there are many other examples of that on so many different levels. That's what Godship is about. It's not about pointing fingers, wagging fingers, and judging one another, and that's sinful and that's wrong, and you're going to go to hell and burn forever and ever. But it's a path, it's a walk that you take. Through time, you heal, and you take on wisdom and understanding, and you start to relinquish attachments. Going back to that analogy again, if you've ever tried to eat more vegetables, for example, maybe at first if you ate the vegetables, they didn't taste so good, and you had to force yourself. But through time, as you begin to let go of certain types of foods that weren't so good for you, and you try to appreciate the more healthy foods, you begin to maybe really understand the subtleties of the different types of foods that you didn't understand before. And you begin to appreciate those subtleties that you didn't formerly appreciate because your taste buds were not adjusted to a more healthy way of living. So I'm just giving you that analogy so you can understand, begin to understand sort of what's being talked about here and what's the path to immortality. And I'm not suggesting being a vegan is that way, but I'm giving you an analogy of what is that godlike path that's being talked about. It's really ultimately boils down to what's going to promote life and light and love versus what's going to promote death, destruction, decay, you see. Goes on to say, for if you were not existing in flesh, you received flesh when you entered this world. Why will you not receive flesh when you ascend into the aeon? That which is better than the flesh is that which is for the cause of life. That which came into being on your account, is it not yours? So think about that. If Christ sacrificed his body for you, then would it be a bit of an insult to not assume that that's intended for you? You don't have to question it. There's nothing here about whether you're worthy or not. This has already been given to you before you were brought here in the flesh, because God in heaven understands this is not your fault. This is merely a consequence of the process that was set forth from the beginning. And there's nothing wrong about it. It's all a design that's beautifully woven. But the most enlightening part of this is to understand that you have the capacity to rise above and to leave this realm when you're ready. Does not that which is yours exist with you? Yet while you are in this world, what is it that you lack? This is what you have been making ever effort to learn. So it's constantly, we're always looking for a way to better ourselves, correct? That's if we have any desire to continue to live. And when you stop looking for ways to better yourself is when you start to stagnate. And when you start to stagnate, you start to decay. So the highest cause is to return to the pleroma and become as an aeon, an attribute of God. Now, that's like one of the most highest forms you can reach, even reaching the state of a son or daughter of God, and going back as a son or daughter of God or pleroma is very significant, so much less becoming an aeon. But Christ became an aeon. The afterbirth of the body is old age, and you exit in corruption. You have absence as a gain. This is exactly just saying what I said in the past video. You gain nothing from this world. There's nothing you can take with you except for the wisdom that you've gained. And it will only be of good to you is if you understand why you're taking that wisdom. If you believe that wisdom accounts for nothing, then it holds no purpose. It will decay with your body. So this is where the Gnostic moment, the gnosis, becomes vital to growing in the spirit and the light. So if you are going to gain great wisdom, but you don't know the way to carry that wisdom with you, then in your continuance of coming back to the next incarnation, then you're not going to carry that wisdom with you. Much like a computer program, you have told the computer program that this wisdom accounts for nothing, and end of story, hit exit button, and therefore in your next incarnation you'll come back with nothing. So that's why having gnosis, or taking part in the tree of knowledge, good and evil, and the tree of life is vital. You have to have both. You can't just have one or the other if you want to continue to grow. And you'll continue to stagnate so long as you'll come back as many lifetimes as it necessary for finally the light bulb to come on and you go, oh, I get it. I'm actually in a play. I really am. It's not a joke. It's not just a story. It really is what is. And when you have that, then you will die understanding and peace. Oh, I need not have fear. I'm at peace because I know that everything, all the lessons and wisdom I brought with me, gained during this lifetime, is not lost. And I will bring it with me in my next incarnation, whether that is that you're ready to go back to the pleroma or that you still have attachments. There's more that you need to gather in this realm called the Kanoma. For you will not give up what is better if you depart. That which is worse has diminution, but there is grace for it. In other words, here it's saying the better parts of everything, all the wisdom that you have, that's not going to be given up if you choose not to give it up. But the only way, again, to do that is to understand you can take that wisdom with you. Otherwise, you take nothing with you. And then the universe that is will have been proven to be true, which is that it amounts to nothing. But there is grace for it. You have a choice. You can take it with you for a better departure, or you can take it with you to amount to less than what you came in, which is, why is it less than what you came in? Because you lost an opportunity. You gained so much and you threw it away. But there is grace for it, and that's the key. In other words, you have more opportunities, and there are infinite opportunities. Lastly, nothing then redeems us from this world, but the all which we are saved. So there's nothing in this world that's going to redeem you. You have to stop looking for the superheroes in the movies that we're all fixated on in this culture. You know, it's Thor, it's Superman, the billion-dollar blockbusters that we're all so waiting for the moment of Christ to come in the clouds, the great salvation, the great hope, when in reality, the only thing that's going to save us from ourselves is ourselves. We have received salvation from end to end. It's already in us. It always has been and always will be within us. Let us think in this way. Let us comprehend in this way. You understand that, and you will have the greatest understanding of all, the greatest empowerment of all, because you will understand that your power is infinite, because it comes from God, and you are part of God. You're the body of God. So you only have to realize this, and it's the beginning of infinite power and infinite immortality. But I want to remind you, power is not controlling things. Power is found when you're completely liberated and you have no limitations. That's complete power. All right, with that, thank you for listening, and we'll pick up for the last video in this series. So we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.